All right, my babies. We're at 5.3, prioritizing requirements. Prioritize requirements. What's the purpose? Earlier we did trace requirements and maintain requirements. Now we're doing prioritize. Naturally, prioritize requirements literally means picking the requirements that are the priority and putting them on the plan or something like this. So the purpose of prioritize requirements is to rank requirements in the order of relative importance. Wow. Wow. What's the description? Prioritization is the act of ranking requirements to determine their relative importance to stakeholders. Not the project. When a requirement is prioritized, it is given greater or lesser priority. They could have written a couple of more paragraphs just to explain how prioritizing something is either giving it a higher priority or a lesser priority. Sarcasm. Priority can refer to, like, sarcasm is the lowest form of humor the average can actually accomplish. My bad. Priority can refer to the relative value of a requirement or to the sequence in which it will be implemented. Sequence, you get it? Because timelines. Prioritization is an ongoing process with priorities changing as the context changes. As we maintain requirements, what we do is we also check if the priorities are still relevant. Interdependence between requirements are identified and may be used as the basis for prioritization. Prioritization is a critical exercise that seeks to ensure the maximum value is achieved. Well, think of prioritization as reviewing the work you did and kind of like highlighting why it was relevant for you to do it. So what are the inputs? Are requirements and designs. Any requirement in the form of text, matrices, diagrams that are ready to prioritize. Designs, any designs in the form of text, prototypes, diagrams that are ready to prioritize. See, now is the first time they mentioned text, prototypes, and diagrams. We assume they exist, but it's the first time they mention it in design. And here is a diagram for us, input, output. What are the input? Requirements, maintained, designs, maintained. And while we're prioritizing requirements, we need to look at the tools, which are business constraints, changing strategy, domain knowledge, governance approach, requirements architecture, requirements management tools repository, and solution scope. What's the output? Prioritized requirements, prioritized designs. And all of them feel a note to the risk assessment part, I guess. Assess risk, which is chapter 6.3. Well, don't worry, we'll get to that. What are the elements of it? Basis for prioritization. The basis of which requirements are prioritized is agreed upon by relevant stakeholders as defined in the business analysis, planning, and monitoring knowledge area. Wow. So here, agreed upon by relevant stakeholders. Let's give it green. Why did I choose green? I don't know. Typical factors that influence prioritization include, should I pick different colors for different like weights? But we're just highlighting stuff that kind of like go, that's basically something that we don't really have to kind of like consider ourselves because we're handing it over to the fucking stakeholders. Typical factors that influence prioritization include benefit, the advantage that accrues to stakeholders as a result of requirements implementation, as measured against the goals and objectives for the change. So the benefit basically here of prioritization is what's going to happen if we actually prioritize it or not. And we measure it basically, we check the implementation of it and we measure it against like the goals and objectives for the change. The benefit provided can refer to a specific functionality, desired quality, or strategic goal or business objective. If there are multiple stakeholders, each group may perceive benefits differently, naturally. Conflict resolution and negotiation may be employed to come to the consensus on overall benefits. Yeah, ultimately, we really can't decide that then. Penalty, the consequences. See, okay, so and this is one of those places where I look at you and I go like, remember how many times I told you like we're documenting things and we're getting approval specifically so we don't get in trouble. Imagine dealing with 5, 6 stakeholders. Each one sees the benefit different, but you kind of have to decide if you want to prioritize it or not because some benefits are kind of like allocated differently on the value chain. And the penalty, the consequences that result from not implementing a given requirement. So basically, when you're prioritizing, you check the benefit, you check the penalty, you check the cost, and you check the risk. Check anything. You check dependencies, you check time sensitivities, you check stability, you check regulatory or policy compliance. You consider all these things while giving it priority. priority. And so when it comes to the penalty, it includes prioritizing requirements in order to meet regulatory or policy demands imposed on the organization, which may take precedence over the stakeholders' interest. Penalty may also refer to the negative consequences of not implementing a requirement that improves the experience of a customer. Wow, that was a lot of me. So penalties come with consequences, right? So negative consequence of not implementing the requirement that improves the experience of a customer. So you have to really think of penalties from all the stakeholders from A to Z, and the same with the benefit, I guess, and the same with the cost and the risk. Cost, the effort and resources needed to implement the requirement. Notice cost here is they said effort and resources because sometimes like you spend a lot of effort on something and it's completely useless while you could have done 10 things in its place. And that comes with resources because you're getting paid for your time, right? Like you, somebody else, it doesn't fucking matter. So an analyst kind of like a business analyst kind of has to like give back, get a back and forth between these things and kind of like establish what's the value that I'm actually creating out of this effort. And so information about cost typically comes from the implementation team or the vendor. Customers, implementation team, yeah, because they're the ones who actually have the math. Or because sometimes you ask somebody to do something and they'd be like, but that will take 2 weeks, right? So like they actually know better because they're the ones doing it. Customers may change the priority of a requirement after learning the cost. Cost is often used in conjunction with other criteria such as cost benefit analysis. Risk, the chance that the requirement cannot deliver the potential value or cannot be met at all. This may include many factors such as the difficulty of implementing a requirement, or the change, or the chance that stakeholders will not accept a solution component, right? Because like stakeholders might be like, we don't want to do this, fucking assholes. If there is a risk that the solution is not technically feasible as well, the requirement that is most difficult to implement may be prioritized to the top of the list in order to minimize the resources that are spent before learning that the proposed solution cannot be delivered. So here, with something like this, like if there's a if there's a requirement that's very heavy, for example, we might actually proceed with that one first, even though it's going to consume a lot more. But at the very least, instead of doing all the small requirements and spending time on them or energy or effort or resources, we dive into the one thing that could make or break the actual solution for us. That's basically it. A proof of concept may be developed to establish that high risk options are possible. Proof of concept. I love this word, or I love this phrase, or I love this sentence, or I love this saying. I don't know. Dependencies, relationships between requirements where one requirement cannot be fulfilled unless the other requirement is fulfilled. These dependencies are very important for you to kind of like allocate because they are the clearest, I think, form of prioritization. It doesn't matter how much you want to do this, you have to finish a couple of things beforehand. So you go do those things first in order for you to start with it. It may be possible to achieve efficiencies by implementing related requirements at the same time. Dependencies may also be external to the initiative, like it could be something beyond the actual solution, including but not limited to other teams' decisions, funding commitments. It's true, because maybe something that you're working on requires a certain money or certain approval about a certain contract somewhere in the future. So you have to consider these things. And resource available. Dependencies are identified as part of the task trace requirements. Aha! Trace requirements. So in trace requirements, dependencies are actually like used in order for us to kind of like understand how to trace the requirements and how to track them. Because if there's a dependency that we need to be done before we actually go for it, that's where the tracking works. Because once it's active, then once we get what we want for the requirement to move, once we get the dependency we want, whatever we're depending on is set and ready for us to move forward. That's the tracing part, right? Because you're tracing the movement or the tracing the activity or tracing the connections. Time sensitivity, the best before date of the requirement, which after which the implementation of the requirement loses significant value. Uh, yeah, like if there's a launch of something after a couple of weeks and the requirement will take 3 weeks, absolutely no point for you to like do it after that time. You either do it now or you kind of like decide you don't want to do it, or it might reflect on the actual project itself, because that requirement is necessary and you can't finish it on time, then ultimately, like, you have to figure something else out. In which the benefit derived will be, this includes time to market scenarios, in which the benefit derived will be exponentially greater if the functionality is delivered ahead of the competition. It can also refer to seasonal functionality that only has value at specific time of the year. Amazing. Stability, the likelihood that the requirements will change, either because it requires further analysis or because stakeholders have not reached a consensus about it. If a requirement is not stable, it may have a lower priority, or in order to minimize unanticipated rework and wasted efforts. How would the requirement look if it's not stable? If it's not stable, maybe because it's part of the dependencies that it has is basically something about the market, and maybe it's a seasonal thing, because if we're doing something in summer, then the market in summer is different than the market in winter. Or maybe it's a logistical thing. I have no idea. But I'm just like putting stuff out there in order for me to understand what this word, where this word lies. Because if you're looking for something and you don't know where to look, you can't find it. Right? My favorite uh, was a joke, and the guy was looking for his keys under the light of the actual, like, under a street light, and the guy came and started helping him, and then he looked at him, the guy, and he was like, "Are you sure you lost your key here?" And the other guy responds, goes like, "No, I'm not sure, but if I can't find it here, then I won't be able to find it anywhere because there's no light anywhere. So it has to be here, or else fuck my life." Regulatory or policy compliance, requirements that must be implemented in order to meet regulatory or policy demands imposed on the organization, which may take precedence over the stakeholders' interests. So remember, regulatory or policy compliance. Regulatory is more government and policy is more internal. So some requirements are either culturally not cool, or from a regulations perspective, fuck you, we don't want you to conduct business this way. What are the challenges of prioritization as well? We're still here. Yeah. The elements that help us in prioritizing. Challenges of prioritization. Prioritization is an assessment of relative value. Each stakeholder may value something different. When this occurs, one of the challenges is stakeholders' valuation. There may be conflict among stakeholders. Stakeholders will also have difficulty characterizing any requirement as a lower priority, and this may impact the ability to make necessary trade-offs. In addition, stakeholders may intentionally or unintentionally indicate priority to influence the result of their desired outcome. I don't know how business analysts are supposed to handle that, but sometimes they're very biased stakeholders. So be wary of that. Different types of requirements may not all respond to the criteria in the same way and may appear to conflict. There may be a need for stakeholders to make trade-offs in prioritization. Yay! Continual prioritization. Priorities may shift as the context evolves and as more information becomes available. Initially, prioritization is done at a higher level of abstraction. What do they mean by that? As the requirements are further refined, prioritization is done at a more granular level. Okay. So like initially we kind of like prioritize randomly, and as we get deeper into the requirements, we kind of like are able to assess whether we make the right decision or not, or whether the priority they're in is like actually where it's supposed to be. And we'll incorporate additional basis for prioritization as they become appropriate. So at first you're looking from the outside in, or from a higher level. And I really want you just to imagine looking at a tree, and the closer you get, you see more details on the branches. That's basically what we're doing. The basis of prioritization may be different at various stages of the change. For example, stakeholders may initially prioritize based on benefits. The implementation team may then reprioritize the requirements based on the sequence in which they must be implemented due to technical constraints. Once the technical constraints, yeah, so like things change. Once the implementation team has provided the cost of each requirement, stakeholders may reprioritize yet again, because then suddenly they're like, I thought this was a priority, but if it's going to cost us this much now, let's do the other stuff. Guidelines and tools, business constraints, regulatory statutes, contractual obligations, and business policies that may define priorities. Amazing. Change strategy provides information on costs, timelines, and value realization, which are used to determine priority of requirements. Domain knowledge. See, these are stuff that we have to figure out, right, as a business analyst. Domain knowledge, knowledge and expertise in the business domain. Governance approach outlines the approach of prioritizing requirements. Requirements architecture utilized to understand the relationship with other requirements and products. Requirements management tools repository. This is the one that we actually like influence directly, right? We mentioned it in chapter 4 when we were talking about elicitation and collaboration. We actually like there's a whole lot of ways that the actual company might have done it before, the client might have done it before, and you might have done them before as well. So you'll have like a full like in programming we call it a code base. So including a requirements attribute for prioritization can help a business analyst to sort and access requirements by priority. Solution scope, like as in like where the solution might fit. Considered when prioritizing requirements to ensure scope is managed. And what are the techniques? Look at this. Backlog management, used to compare requirements to be prioritized. The backlog can be location where the prioritization is maintained. And backlog basically is like, where are we delaying? What are the things that are pushing us back and all that stuff? Naturally, because sometimes you expect, like, you start with a requirement expecting something to be a dependency to be ready, but like it kind of comes off like maybe the dependency is not fulfilling its part, or maybe that's not the one that we were looking for, or maybe we overshot how we could rely on it. Business cases used to assess requirements against identified business goals and business objectives to determine importance. So business cases, decision analysis used to identify high value requirements, estimation used to produce estimates for the basis of prioritization, financial analysis used to assess the financial value of the set requirements and how timing and delivery will affect the value, also helps in cost. Interviews for the risk, right? Interviews used to gain an understanding of a single small group of stakeholders basis of prioritization because you need them to kind of like say you need them to guide you with how to prioritize, and they basically have to approve the prioritization. Remember, if they were able to like pick this stuff and prioritize them, they would never have fucking hired you. Item tracking used to track issues raised by stakeholders during prioritization. Prioritization used to facilitate, like we're using prioritization as a tool to prioritize in our prioritization documentation. But they had to mention it because prioritization means picking priorities, prioritizing something. Risk analysis and management used to understand the risks on the basis of prioritization because like anytime you change something, something else changes somewhere. So you kind of have to be able to kind of connect them together and figure something out. And this could be like an hour's work, or it could be like 5 fucking weeks work. I have no fucking idea. Like again, depending on the scope, depending on what you're changing, depending on the priority itself and what it's connected to and what's connected to it, dependencies and shit. Workshops used to gain the understanding of stakeholders basis of prioritization or priorities in a facilitated group setting. Great workshops. And the stakeholders here are customers because they verify the prioritized requirements will deliver value for a customer end-to-end perspective. The customer can also negotiate to have a prioritization change based on the relative value. There's the end user, verifies the prioritized requirements will deliver value from a customer or end user perspective. Implementation subject matter expert provides input relating to technical dependencies and can negotiate to have the prioritization changed based on technical constraints. That's why you talk to an expert, right? Because an expert can tell you what's an expert? It's a guy who's had enough experience with something. So a lot of things are based on our own research. Remember, as a business analyst, your job is not to be the specific person. Your job is to be able to connect the specificities of something. A project manager uses the prioritization as an input to the project plan and into the allocation of requirements to release, and a regulator can verify the prioritization is consistent with legal and regulatory constraints, and a sponsor verifies the prioritized requirements will deliver value from an organizational perspective. Look at that. Outputs, requirements prioritized or ranked requirements are available for additional work, ensuring available for additional work. Like we will come back to them. Until the project is done, we're going to come back to everything we did. Ensuring the highest value requirements are addressed first. And designs prioritized or ranked designs are available for additional work, ensuring that the highest value designs are addressed first. Amazing. And we're done with 5.3, prioritizing requirements. Now we have assessing requirements and changes. Look at that. Another fucking video. Thank you, babies.